episode 2 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary with Catherine
and Kristen, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club where we take one book a month and dive into all the drama, adventure, and romance we can find. Hi, Catherine.
Hey, Kristen. So we're huge fans of YA and NA and fantasy and romance. It's
a problem.
Yes. So I guess for me, my first love of a series was the OG. It was Harry Potter. And that was the first thing that kind of got me into reading outside of school when I was around 11. I definitely got into a few other series, but that was always my number one. And then after that, I would say Amelia Atwater Rhodes books started my love and obsession with vampires. And Lord of the Rings was my first foray into fantasy. And then, of course, Twilight was in my teen years, and I was Team Edward all the way.
I don't know how you could be anything other than Team Edward, really. I know there are people out there who are Team Jacob, but I don't get it. For me, the first series I really remember being into, series-wise, was Harry Potter, for sure. I didn't actually get into it, though, I think until there was 2 books out. So I started reading it, and I already had 2. But after that, I remember every single book coming out and going to the store at midnight to get the books. I also remember taking the Chronicles of Narnia out at the public library, and I also really loved them. And when they made the movies, I was loving life. I thought the movies were really well done. But I just it's really hard for me to pinpoint when I sort of was actively reading for pleasure outside of school, because I just remember I was always that way. I was always a really voracious reader. I remember really being into Nora Roberts when I was a young teenager. I was 12, 13, 14 years old reading Nora Roberts books, which are if you haven't read them, really, really heavy on the romance. Really not graphic sex scenes, but they crest, right? There's that description of, he took me under and I swelled like a wave. There's a lot of allusions to stuff in those books. I'm really surprised my parents didn't comment on the fact that I was reading full on romantic themed books, but they didn't. I remember the first book I really took out at the library at school just for pleasure was in grade 7-8, and it was called Blood and Chocolate. They did make a movie about it, and the movie was equally terrible. The book was also not great. I cringe when I think about it now, because the book itself was not an awesome book, but it really kickstarted my fascination into the fantasy genre. It was a full-on werewolf book. And then, of course, I was into Twilight, and I really liked, I really love Kelly Armstrong. She's a Canadian author. She's fantastic. She has so many books, but hers really got me into the idea of series. And now I almost feel like I exclusively read series, not on purpose. It's just I'm not satisfied with a book that finishes in one book. I need to know more.
Yeah, for sure. You want a book that there might be more little parts to it. That's why A Discovery of Witches, I love that, because she's coming out with more books, and she's going to have spin-offs with different characters, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, it's nice being able to get to know a character, and one book almost doesn't seem enough to introduce all the characters that need to be introduced, and then have them be fleshed out and really have them evolve as characters across one book. You almost need the multiple books in order to really get to know the characters. So yeah, I love that she's doing this spin-off now, this extra story. So if you tuned in last week, you will know that we are on part 2 of 4 of our foray into Discovery of Witches. Just a heads up, obviously we are not a spoiler-free zone. and things could get a little saucy.
So, we are starting with chapter 12 today in week 2. Um, Starting with, I guess we ended last chapter. They are going on a dinner date. Diana is going to cook for Matthew in her apartment. So, she's picking out a menu.
Yep. So she asked him at the end of the last chapter, I guess, what he eats, because what does a vampire eat other than blood? Nothing in most of the things you read. But he says he's omnivorous. So she decides to kind of look up menus and recipes that are mostly raw food. But then she also, while she's out, calls a zoologist to ask about wolf eating patterns.
Yeah, so I guess Matthew had done some research in the past, and when she was looking him up, she found some of his research, and he did a lot of research on wolves for some reason. So she thought, hey, logical jump. He's into wolves. I'll feed him what wolves eat. She went out and she got a bunch of raw food and nuts and berries and that sort of thing, and that's what they have to eat.
Yeah, and she is very worried about the menu throughout the entire date. It is very pressing.
She definitely is. She's very concerned that he's not going to like it, or he's not going to be able to eat it, or it's going to make him sick, or I don't know what. But she cares a lot, which
Yeah.
is sort of, again, we talked about that last week, that it's so their relationship has gotten so intense so
Yeah.
quickly, and this is sort of just another level of that, of her really caring what he thinks, when really they've only hung out a handful of times, like 4 or 5 times at this point.
Yeah, and only like one of them would be classified as a date. A few can be classified as him stalking her, for sure. But I think the only date would have been yoga, realistically.
Yeah. Anyway, so the thing that I really like about this book is the whole thing right now is taking place at Oxford University in England. Um, and the way that they describe the university blows my mind, because she lives in I guess, almost like a dorm room, but it's a dorm for visiting scholars and professors. It's not a
Mhm.
student dorm. And there's like 18th century furniture and glassware, and like she's getting wine glasses and china plates and everything. That's all like antique. Is
Yeah.
this really how Oxford is? Because those things are worth quite a lot of money, and they're just like throwing it around like it's no big deal.
Yeah. I have no idea personally.
But it would be like, I would absolutely love to go. If that's the case, I'll be
Oh,
like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I'll go.
I'll go
Just
back to school for that.
yeah, 100%. So yeah, so she also, we sort of get a little bit more of a description about her physical appearance, I think, sort of at
Mhm.
this point. So we obviously know she's beautiful because she's attracted the attention of a beautiful, like, ages old vampire. So she has to be beautiful. What sort of perplexes me is she's got frizzy hair all the time, and she says it's from the excess magic coming out of her body. So her hair is always frizzy. So she always wears it in a bun at the base of her neck, which
Mhm.
just, screams fashion. Uh, and she wears like turtlenecks and wide leg trousers. Like, really? Come on. I'm
Yeah.
sure you can muster up a little bit more of an outfit when a handsome vampire's coming to dinner.
Yeah, she's pretty young for what her fashion sense is described as. Like, she doesn't sound like a woman in her late 20s, early 30s when she's describing her clothes. And she says that most of her clothes is the exact same. It's another one of those, like, not like other girl tropes, is that she's so effortlessly beautiful and she doesn't know she's beautiful and all of those things. I feel like there's a lot of moments like that in these books where she's not like other girls. So,
Yeah. And, you know, black is her color. It says that she wears a lot of black,
mhm.
which is fine. But to me, that just seems like she would be walking around campus in like her black turtleneck and her black wide leg pants and like what her loafers. She would look like one of those like art majors. Like all she
Yeah.
needs is a beret, and she's ready to go to a spoken word jam session. So there was another really interesting moment, I guess, when they're having dinner. Obviously, she's asking him a lot about himself and his life. He's also asking her questions. So they have a little cool conversation about um, how humans explain away creatures. Because there was a big focus in the last section in last week's section about the creatures can't be seen all together because they attract so much attention. So they had a really interesting take saying that where the myths come from is based in fact almost. So like us humans have vampires can't go out in the sunlight, when in this book no, they can go out in the sunlight, but it makes it makes their supernaturalness harder to ignore when
Yeah.
they're in the day. So humans just made this sort of myth up to sort of make themselves feel better.
Explain away creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked that. I thought that was an interesting take. It's not like, oh, they can go out in the sun and they sparkle. Like,
A bit of different take than Twilight, but
yeah.
yeah, it's definitely new and something that I hadn't heard before, which I definitely loved. And it kept coming up where they'd explain different myths throughout the supper, and most of them were super interesting, like garlic, because it's so pungent that a vampire would shy away from it,
Yeah.
but only because of the taste and smell, not because they actually couldn't eat it. So yeah, it was definitely interesting.
We learn here that Matthew is actually 1500 years old. He was born in about the 5th century when Clovis was the king. But yeah, so we learn that he's 1500 years old. And I just think, like, of course his perfect match would be a historian.
Yeah.
Like somebody who has a history background and who's obsessed with history in general.
Yeah,
So
and she
like,
is very obsessed with history. Like she brings it up often about like, and I know having somebody who actually knows stuff is definitely a reason to do it, but there's just so many different things and you're like, how do you know about every single one of these things? I guess she did say she had a photographic memory,
but like,
but
I just find it funny. And again, I understand that she is writing for a certain audience and she is writing in a certain location. But it's just funny that she seems to know a lot about British history, but
mhm.
like not a lot about other histories. So like it just makes the chances of them meeting each other and being together and loving each other sort of even more fantastical, because it's like she is literally obsessed with everything that he has ever done
Yeah.
on her own, even without him being involved.
Yeah. And she is an American. She's originally from America, so it's odd that she is so knowledgeable on everything that is Matthew's past.
Yes. So I find that this sort of dinner date, is sort of the first time that they can really be honest with each other. So they open up and she tells him what she saw when she opened the book. She did open it for a second, look at a couple of pages, and then she was too freaked out, closed it, returned it.
Mm-hmm.
So she actually tells him what she saw, meaning she's starting to trust him. And he actually tells her why he wants the book.
Yeah.
He says that he's really been looking for the manuscript for a really long time, and he thinks it has the origin of all creatures in it, and it's how they started, and that's why he wants the book, and that he's been looking for it for ages and ages and ages.
Yeah, and they keep kind of mentioning that all the creatures want it for different reasons, but it really seems like the creatures all want it for the same reason. It's all about the origin of all the creatures. And for the vampires, it seems like, well, for the witches want to be able to end the vampires, is kind of what it seemed like Peter Knox was saying. But the vampires want to know how to continue on with their race, so it's kind of the opposite. So it does seem like they're all looking for it for the same reason. But Diana and Matthew, when they're talking about it, they do say that that everybody thinks that the book is a contradictory thing, but it seems like it's just everything, or that's likely what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, the vampires want it because they want to continue their own race because they're dying out. The witches want it to end the vampires because they hate vampires. But
Yeah.
again, like that does sort of the same thing. And the demons want it to figure out what, like, how they came to be. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just feel like if everybody worked together, man,
Yeah,
why
really
can't we
though.
all work together? So after they have their dinner, Diana gets a call from her Aunt Sarah and Emily. Emily is Sarah's wife. Emily has a really unique power in that she's a seer. So she can tell when somebody is in distress, or she can see not too far into the future. It seems like her power sees, sort of more like the right now into the immediate future.
Mhm.
So she gets a call, and they're wondering why she's hanging out with a vampire, because vampires are terrible and they're dangerous and you shouldn't be around them.
Mhm.
And I just think that sucks to have. It sucks to have. Imagine having a seer in the family and literally everything you do, they could potentially see and then call you about it.
And
Like,
question your motives and why
yeah,
you're doing something. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. That would be, I would not want that.
And it's unfortunate because, as much as we come to love Sarah and Emily, they also have these preconceived prejudices that that aren't really based in true fact. So
Mhm.
they're hating on Matthew. They don't really know Matthew,
It's very
but
Romeo and Juliet, like hating somebody because of their family. Yeah. So then at the end of dinner, Matthew asks her to come to his lab the next day so that he can show her what he's been working on and why the manuscript is so important, basically, to him. So the next day she goes to the library. Then at lunchtime, they both go to his lab, and there is so much security there that it is kind of crazy. At that point, we also meet Marcus when she's inside, and he is a lot of fun. I love a lot of the a lot of the side characters in this book. It's mostly guy side characters, but they've all been really fun so far.
so Marcus is technically Matthew's son. So Matthew made him. He has no filter, which is part of the reason that he is so fun. He works in the lab with him. He is a former doctor. So he's just the way he is with Diana is very comfortable, very relaxed, sort of the opposite of Miriam. Like, she seems angry to be around her all the time,
Hmm.
whereas Marcus just accepts the fact that she's a witch and the fact that she's in their lab right away, right?
Yeah.
And he gives her he like smells her, and she's got excess adrenaline, and he sort of is like, wow, I
You
can
smell
understand.
tasty.
Yeah.
Yeah. He goes into how vampires are attracted to adrenaline and why he's sure Matthew wants to be around her, is basically what he implies. You'd think that she would have had more issues with vampires in her life, kind of like she has with demons, because you hear before that demons like to follow her around all the time. You'd think vampires would too, but haven't really heard much on that. Maybe there's not as many vampires around her.
And it could be too, like, obviously Matthew knew she was a witch, right? So I wonder if they maybe they sense her excess adrenaline, but also sense that she's a witch. So they're like, well, stay away. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And vampires have been around for so much longer that generally they've lived long enough to know better, really, than to go after witches, you'd think.
Yeah. So they're in the lab and they start telling Diana, well, they being Matthew, Marcus, and Miriam, start telling Diana that vampires are not being born. They're having trouble making, like, there's not as many vampires in the world. So they're saying that their species is deteriorating, and that's why they want the book.
Yeah. And that also explains all of the vampire like murders that are happening in different parts of the world, really, it seems like.
Yeah. So that's sort of I wouldn't even call it a secondary storyline. It's more of like a fourth storyline.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sort of something that runs throughout the whole book, is that people are being murdered.
Yeah.
And they look like they're being murdered by vampires. So Matthew is looking into DNA sequencing. He wants to understand creatures' DNA, what makes them different from humans, to try and sort of discover how they all came to be.
And probably how to make the species thrive more than it is now. And he goes on to say that all of the creature species are deteriorating, including witches, that they're not as powerful as they used to be.
Yes. This chapter that is now upon us, where they're in the lab, there's a lot of sciencey stuff they talk about.
Mm-hmm.
They get into it. Nuclear versus mitochondrial DNA, Darwin's theory of evolution. I mean, like, I know what it is, but I don't really need to read about it so explicitly.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot for a book that the main storyline is Matthew and Diana, and this is like you said, it's the fourth, maybe the fifth. Like, there are so many other stories that they're following here. It just is a lot of information in this scene.
So, yeah, they talk a lot about the science side.
Yeah, they talk about different chromosomes that the creatures have, and all the creatures have a different number of chromosomes as compared to humans, which is definitely an interesting take. But you'd think that humans would have noticed by now, like, that demons had different makeups, especially since demons don't really know they're demons until they're told, usually. So it seems like it's something that humans would have noticed before now.
Yeah. Like, especially in the age of DNA testing and, blood sequencing and all that jazz, you would think that they would have found some sort of evidence at this point.
Yeah.
But, hey, man, the creatures have been able to keep it quiet. More power to them. But my favorite line of the chapter is when Matthew says, "That's enough science for today." Yeah. And in my head, I said, thank God, because I honestly felt like I was in science class in high school again.
Yeah.
They go to yoga again.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, like, I think in the book, their third time going to yoga together. This is the day after their dinner. They still haven't, like, really talked about being in a relationship or what they were to each other or what they were doing with each other. When they're at yoga, I found this so funny. Another vampire accidentally brushes up against Diana as they're, like, getting out of the car to go to yoga, and Matthew immediately grabs her hand to, like, stake his claim.
My
right?
own. Yeah, that was very possessive for sure.
Yeah. And, like, it just, I don't want to say it bothers me, but he literally went from 2-3 days ago to abandoning her and going hunting because he's craving her and he doesn't want to hurt her, to now all of a sudden somebody else can't even do an accidental brush without like him being like, no, 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 no.
Yeah, and it almost seems like it's like unconsciously done, that he's like, nope, you can't touch her. That's like putting another vampire scent on her, basically. He's not for it.
Which I get, like if it's unconscious.
Well, that's what I'm hoping.
It's still like they've still only known each other a week.
Yeah.
And he calls her ma valiante fille. So his brave or valiant girl. And it's like, she's yours, dude. Like, I know you're possessive, but like,
that's a
brakes.
lot.
Put the brakes on.
Yeah.
That night, he takes her to dinner. She goes to
the favor.
Yeah, she goes to his place, and probably my favorite thing of all time, before they go up to his room. So obviously, he's a member of the super secret dorm. So only the really, really, really elite members of Oxford get to use this apartment building dorm sort of thing, and it has a freaking wine cellar, and he could just go down and take any of the wine. So dinner, sure, let's go down, and they take 4 bottles for wine, and like, I can be a lush. I like wine, but like, you're gonna be cut. You are going to be so intoxicated. Like if they're sharing it glass for glass.
Yeah, Diana
will die. Right?
100%.
I hope that he's the one doing most of the drinking, because obviously I'm not concerned that he'll die.
No.
Yeah. But I'm concerned for her.
Yeah, definitely. I do appreciate, though, how much alcohol is in the books, because I know a lot of times books and movies shy away from drinking. Binge drinking, maybe. I would call Matthew a binge drinker. If I'm being honest. Yeah. Binge drinking tendencies for sure.
That's true. Matthew also, so he's super into wine. Like, wine is his thing. So they actually spend a lot of this dinner just tasting the wine, and he like has a little game where he has her taste it, and what do you think it tastes like? And she has to try and get from it what he gets from it, and then he tells her what he tastes, and obviously he can taste so much more than she can, but it's like, I don't know, a little game. They literally spend all of dinner talking about wine.
Well, up until she tastes one and she's like, it tastes like you, and he questions her on that, and then she decides to ask him how she would taste, which like she knows he gets angry about things. Why would you ask how you taste to a predator that would eat you? Like, would you ask a shark, how do I taste? When the shark is actively trying not to eat you? It doesn't make any sense. And she's like, he gets so angry. And she's mentioned before that she's afraid of him sometimes because of how angry he gets. Yet she still asked that question. I was shook, personally.
Yeah. I also, like, she said that one of the wines they have, I'm sorry, tastes like chalk and butterscotch. Yeah. Why would you want a wine to taste like chalk? To me, that is ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't understand that.
Why is that a goal in wine? No. Agreed.
Yeah, he also says at one point during this dinner that he's never felt like this before. And I just have to kind of roll my eyes because he is very old. How have you never felt like this before, and why? In your entire lifetime, what are you doing that's any fun if you've never felt in love after 2 weeks with somebody else? I don't know. It just seems very cliche. Vampire falls for a human
Yeah.
moment. You want to feel special. So she feels very special because he's never felt like this in all of his years.
I also just so I find their relationship is moving super fast, which we sort of have talked about.
Yes.
But it sort of reminds me of like their relationship just being like sort of a soul mate sort of scenario.
Yes. Yeah, so I agree. I don't really understand. At one point, Hamish did say something about mating, and I wonder what that looks like in this world. Like, do you get one mate per person? Do you just mate with somebody that you're attracted to? What is mating?
Um so he drives her home after their dinner and she goes into her house, she waves him off. Everything is fine. However, she sees scratches all over her doorknob when she goes into her room. And my mind is just so like, what a moron. Like,
Mm-hmm.
she literally takes note of it, brushes it off as nothing. Like, we live in a sort of a safe area, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had somebody try and break into my house. But if I saw freaking scratches
Mm-hmm.
all over my doorknob and the keyhole, like, I feel like it's 101. Like, obviously check that nobody has somebody has broken in.
Yes.
Also, 3 different species of creatures think you are in possession of a magical book that you do not have, but they all think you do. Of course they're going to break into your house and
Yeah.
look around. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
She has no self-preservation, it seems, whatsoever.
Yeah.
Or she's being willfully just stupid.
It seems like that because I really don't understand it.
The next day, she goes back to the library. Again, she lives there.
It's true.
Peter Knox is there, and he is, again, from last week's episode, he's sort of a representative for the witches.
Mm-hmm.
He's not very nice. He's already sort of approached her a couple of times, insinuating that because she's a witch, she needs to side with the witches. And I think he tried to use his magic to like probe into her brain, into her head,
Yeah.
and she had to like shove him out. So he is in the library as well, and he approaches her. Her and Matthew are sitting together this time around, and he calls Diana down to the dirt because she's sitting with a vampire, or like they touched, their arms brushed each other. So like he thinks she is like a traitor and a terrible person. It's just, dude, like, I don't understand where these people learn their manners.
Yeah.
Like, obviously,
Honey.
if you want something, suck up to somebody. You don't
Mm-hmm.
like it bothers me because they are doing the exact opposite of what they want to do. They're pushing her right into Matthew's arms because he is the only one being polite
Yeah.
and nice and like a friend. And yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes more than that, but they're disrespecting her, they're insulting her, they're bringing her dead parents into the
Mm-hmm.
mix. But like, what it just feels like no sane, logical person would actually do that.
Yeah.
I just can't picture somebody with relative intelligence saying, I need what that girl has, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to insult her. It's like straight out of elementary school.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, isn't that what guys do when they have a crush on you?
So, he's very threatening
Mm-hmm.
in this scene, right? So he threatens them. He says, like, he insults her, says, oh, it was just a fluke. You couldn't get it out again, even if you wanted to. But then says, oh, she's going to get it out for us, right? Like,
Yeah. He's all over the place. He really like it'd be easier if he even tried to like talk her up and be like, you're the only one that can do this. Like, I don't know. There's so many better ways that he could go about this. I just don't understand why he chose this one, other
Yeah.
than the literary device of getting her closer to Matthew.
Yes. Anyway, so they, I guess, Matthew, this threat does not sit well. So he comes out, he says, okay, we're going to leave the library now. So they leave and go back to her place. And Matthew all of a sudden says, we're getting out of here. We're going to go out to the country for a little bit. It's not safe for you here. And she gets mad, which I'm here for.
Yeah.
She's like, no way. You're not telling me what to do. I have a big lecture to prepare for. I need all these books. I ain't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Knox can stuff it, right? And she gets so mad that electricity starts running off of her fingers.
Yeah.
Then she tries to put him underwater to try and get the electricity out. What happens when you mix water and electricity?
Yeah. And you think she'd realize it because apparently she's done it before, she says afterwards. She's like, oh, that's why that happened when I did it as a child. And it's like, yes, that's what does happen when you mix electricity and water.
But she literally went from saying, no, I'm not going, you can't make me, to, oh, I guess, okay, we'll go. Like, I was really proud of her for being like a strong, independent female,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, you can't tell me what to do, to all of a sudden, oh, he's telling her what to do and she's taking it. She lost a little bit for me there.
Yeah, for sure. And during their conversation, so she gets super mad and has the electricity, and then she wants to flee, basically. She has a flee response. And then he grabs her, and she's like asking him to let her go, and he will not. And that was a super red flag for me. I was like, I do not, that's too much. But just another red flag that Matthew has that just gonna ignore for now, I guess. So this was all at his rooms. And then she goes back to her place to pack a bag to go to the country. And when she's on her way inside, the doorman or security guy, I forget his name, he gives her mail. So that's when she goes upstairs and opens her mail and sees the picture of her dead parents in color, which she's never seen it in color before. And I'm sure it's shocking in black and white, and I'm sure it's even worse in color. So she has a bit of a panic here.
Yeah. So somebody anonymously sent her that picture. And yeah, she has a moment. She throws up. She's sick. Her fight or flight response is like in overdrive. So we said in the last episode that she was a child when her parents died. Sarah became her guardian, wouldn't really tell her what happened. So she looked it up in the newspaper and found the picture and saw and, you know, read the headline that they were murdered because the locals thought they were witches.
Mm-hmm.
And then now she got this color picture and it all came rushing back.
So Matthew must have heard something or sensed something was wrong, and he gets the doorman and rushes up to her room, and the doorman opens the door and they get inside, and he basically grabs her and holds her because she is not okay, and then he gives his keys to the doorman to drive his car and put it somewhere so that he can stay with her for a bit.
So
he sedates her.
Yeah.
Then so that she'll sleep. And then, yeah, so once she's asleep, he has a chance to look at his phone and he has multiple missed calls from Marcus. So he finally gives him a call back. And Marcus basically just says that Diana's blood samples are interesting. So he just asks Marcus to come over with the blood samples, with his passport, and with a bag of some sort, and to come over and watch Diana for a bit, basically.
So yeah, so back in the sciencey chapter, they took a sample of Diana's blood to test it. So that's what they're referring to there.
Yeah. And we get a bit more from Marcus here. We hear from him that all of Matthew's bad decisions that he makes are based out of anger. And it's nice to hear from Marcus that because since he knows Matthew so well, and at this point he knows how mad he is, so he's tiptoeing around him just in case he goes even further. Like when he shows up, he doesn't want to go into the house until he's invited in because he's afraid Matthew's going to get territorial. He knows how angry he is at this point and that that is not a good situation to be around.
Matthew leaves for a little bit, and then he comes back. This is the first chat that we get between Matthew and Marcus about a society called the Congregation. So this is where we first hear about it. We learn that Peter Knox, the mean witchy guy, is actually a member of the congregation, and that the congregation is in place. It is almost like it's not entirely a ruling, it's not like a ruling society. Like they don't rule over creatures, but they enforce
Predetermined rules.
Right. They enforce the rules and the laws that have been around for centuries to help creatures keep a low profile. But the biggest rule issue is that there's no, I guess, fraternizing with members of other creatures or with other creatures. So a relationship of a romantic nature between two different types of creatures is forbidden. And it seems silly.
Yeah. Like if two witches are okay to be in a relationship and that's not going to cause too much of a fuss, why would it be any different for a witch and a vampire, especially with how much they historically hate each other?
Yeah.
You'd think it would be so unlikely that it wouldn't even need to be a rule.
So the reasoning is because creatures when they're together, they sort of stand out. So yeah, I don't understand if one creature doesn't stand out, but two creatures do. Why does it matter what combination of creatures it is?
Yeah. Marcus tells Matthew about her blood work and that it's insane and that there are markers for everything they've ever heard of. And even some things that they've never heard of magic wise. So Matthew is shocked and he's like, this can't be right. And Miriam had looked it over and had some notes as well. So Marcus asks if he's going to tell Diana. And Matthew says that he plans to keep it from her, which I think is kind of shitty. It doesn't end up being for that long. So it's like kind of okay. But it still seems a bit unfair to her. Another red flag, if you will. Maybe a pink flag.
Yeah. He finally decides. So originally he was just going to take her out into the country in England for a little bit. He's since changed his mind since getting that picture. They're now going to his family home where he originally is from, a place called Sept-Tours in France. So his mother still lives there, and they're going. Matthew then decides he has to leave for a few minutes. He smelled two scents on the envelope. First one being Peter Knox, which he recognized. He sort of tells Marcus about it. Marcus says, well, you can't hunt Peter Knox. He's a member of the congregation. And he says, nope, I'm going to go hunt the other smell. So I assume it's Jillian because she's a straight up B word and she'll do anything to gain the favor of the witches. She just wants to fit in and be the popular one.
Yeah.
So she did it. So he goes. When he gets back, Diana wakes up. Marcus leaves as soon as Matthew gets back. Diana wakes up. She's feeling all magic-y. She had like a bad dream or something. Her magic gets out of control and she releases a witch wind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like a mini tornado. I sort of like the way they do it in the show better.
Yeah.
Because in the show, she's being threatened by Peter Knox, and her life is sort of at stake, and it's just this huge gale of wind, and like people are blowing away.
Yeah.
In the book, it's more like she's just having a fight or flight response in her home, and it releases and she can settle it quite quickly.
Yeah, and I feel like there's not really a good description of it in the book where you can kind of picture what it even means. Whereas in the show, obviously, it's easier to show what's happening. So she talks about her parents dying with Matthew after. Then they kind of have this conversation after she wakes up, and then she goes to sleep again for a bit, I think. And then Sarah and M call. So she kind of has to explain what's going on and go into a lot more than she has been, because she's been kind of not confiding in them at all. She gets very defensive when they say that she should know how to keep someone out of her head. But really, it's her own fault. You can't just claim ignorance for something like that, I think. Like, you should, as a witch, you should know how to keep someone out of your head. It's probably one of the only things that really would matter, in my opinion.
After she hangs up with, after Matthew talks to Sarah and M and essentially assures them that he'll keep Diana safe, he breaks it to her. P.S. We're not going to the country. We're just going to France instead. She's like, no way, Jose. We're not going that far. And essentially, he bribes her with an old manuscript that she needs for her paper. He just happens to have a copy of in his library at home. So he bribes her with an old book to go to France. And she's like, well, I guess I'm here for it.
So she has to go pack, and she's super low maintenance and takes the smallest bag he's ever seen a woman take anywhere. And she's not like any of the women he knows in his entire life. Super shocked that she doesn't need to take stuff. Anyway, I find the not like other girls thing super annoying, but
yeah. But then but then on top of that, it's his tropes are equally annoying, because he takes her to the airport, and while she's thinking they're going to get on like a plane, no, he takes her to the private tarmac, and he's got a private plane, and that's how they're getting to France. It's like, come on, man. Like, of course and I understand, yes, you're 1,500 years old, you have time to make money. But of course he has a private plane. And of course, once they get there and drive to this little tiny, tiny town in France, and of course they live in a freaking castle. Trope on trope on trope.
Yeah, they're both very tropey people.
But again, I still love it. Moving on, after they get to the castle, we finally meet Matthew's mother. This is obviously not his birth mother. This is his vampire mother. So in the book, the vampires have a really, I guess, for anyway, Matthew's group anyway, they have a really strong sense of family. So Ysabeau, that's her name, Ysabeau, is Matthew's vampire mother, but he treats her with the respect of being his actual mother. She treats him like her actual son, and the same goes for Matthew and Marcus's relationship. Matthew is sort of more a fatherly role to Marcus, and Marcus shows him the respect as a fatherly character. We finally meet Matthew's mother, and in the book, she is described as being a small woman who's really like icy and cold and really elegant, but technically younger than Matthew in look. So she was probably turned as a vampire in age before Matthew was. She's obviously still older than him, but I just find it
30. He was 38 when he was turned, so she could have been her late 20s. She could have been in her 30s. Yeah.
So she looks younger than him, which is why it's sort of weird to think of her as his mother. However, The actress that plays Ysabeau in the show, the actress is Lindsay Duncan. She's great. Love her so much. She's just so like regal and poised and elegant, and I find it really hard to like separate the two in my mind. I now can't picture anybody else but Lindsay Duncan as Ysabeau, Matthew's mother. So
Yeah.
reading the book again, I naturally put her in my mind, even though I guess I shouldn't.
Yeah, even though you are reading that she looks younger, but automatically, yeah, my head does the same. I do put her in the role as well.
Yeah. So they go in, introduce themselves. Diana goes up to her room. They go up to Matthew's room. Obviously, he picks this tower that's super far away from every other part of the castle, and he's like a tower, but it's got like 3 levels. So he's got like a sitting room, and then he's got like a library room, and then he's got his bedroom, and it's all done in browns and golds and greens, and it's very obvious that it's like a man's room, and it's antiques everywhere, so it's a really old man's room.
Old man's room.
Because he is very old. He's 1,500 years old, so
He
he's
is
an
very
old
old.
he's an old man. But I find it a bit annoying that all of the things in his room, so she's like sort of looking around and being picky pokey when they get to his room. All the stuff he's got tons of books and everything like that. They're all famous people. So like he's got paintings by famous people. He's got letters and books by Darwin and plays by Marlowe, and like it's just like, did this guy not know any normal people? Like, did he literally set out to befriend every ancient famous person? It just like, dude.
Yeah, it seems wild. I'm guessing he just kept the stuff from the famous people. Any of his friends that weren't famous, he was like, "Well, that's not special. I'm not keeping that."
That's totally what I would do. They, I guess, Ysabeau comes up and they have a chat, and they speak in Occitan. They tend to reset to that language when they're talking to each other, which puts Diana at a disadvantage, right? Because she doesn't speak this language. It's not very popular anymore. Matthew has a really fancy bed, sort of like a Scrooge McDuck bed. So she goes and takes a nap in it. She sort of, in France, has become this different person. Like, they just got there, and I already feel like she's changed who she is as a person, because it's sort of like she was so stubborn and like, you can't tell me what to do. Now they're in France, and he's like, I'm going to pick you up and put you in bed, and you're going to have a nap. And she's like, okay. And then she like rolls over and has a nap. It's like, come on, man, have some spine.
She's sleeping all the time now. Like, all the time. She slept for, I don't know, it was like midday when they went after yoga. It might have been early evening, maybe. And she slept forever. And then they came here. She slept on the plane. And now she got there for 5 seconds, really. Walked up a bunch of stairs, sure, but she's super athletic. And now she's having a nap. Just seems odd.
So then she wakes up from her nap, and they go for a tour. They go for a nice walk around the grounds, and they visit the stable. And she meets this lovely, like, I guess, a stallion, Balthazar, that Matthew says, oh, don't go near that horse. That horse is not a game. It's not a joke. And she automatically, like, oh, you sweetheart, and is like petting him and stuff. And
best friends.
Right? They're like besties. So of course she can tame the wild horse. Like, again, every trope is in here.
Yeah, she can tame the horse and she can tame the man. It's foreshadowing.
But then, after they go to the stables and look at the horse, she goes for another freaking nap. I understand she's been through an event, but England and France are not that far apart, so it's not like she has a ton of jet lag to worry about. And I'm not trying to, like, I'm not trying to downplay her trauma. However, she has been essentially sleeping nonstop because some guy threatened her. I mean, yes, that's serious, but big whoop. He said some words to her. She's got vampires for bodyguards now. Like,
Yeah.
chill the beans. And then somebody delivered a picture, a very disturbing picture. But like, it's not like she had a huge. It's not like she like participated in the Hunger Games.
She wouldn't be napping as much if she did.
But like, literally, I just think she's sleeping way too much. I feel like she needs to go to the doctor and see somebody about that.
Figure out why. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lot. And like even in the beginning of the book they talk about how much she's a terrible sleeper, but she's not even like there's one night that she doesn't sleep for the whole night. But I'm like, that's not she still gets 7 hours of sleep one of the other nights. Like I don't understand. I don't know. I feel like she isn't really a terrible sleeper.
After she gets up again, after her second nap of the day, they go out for a ride with the horses. However, she's not allowed to ride Balthazar.
She says that she's done dressage and jumping before, which like that's not just riding a horse. That's actually you have to know your way around a horse to do those things.
Yeah. So we can say that she is fairly competent on a horse, and she's told him. However, he still makes her wear all the protective gear, which, like, fair. You should wear protective gear anyway, like, safety first. But not just a helmet. She has to wear, like, a chest pad.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also makes her ride another horse named Rakasa. And then he tells her to go a couple of laps around the paddock, and she knows that it's so that he can see and make sure she's competent on the horse, even though she just told him she's competent on the horse.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't trust her word. He wants to see for himself.
Yeah.
And she sort of starts thinking, oh, maybe like, what if I jumped over the paddock fence? Like, what would happen? And he actually, like, I don't know if they just have a similar mindset. He actually says to her, if she jumps over the paddock fence, the outing is over. And I was just flabbergasted.
Yeah.
Red flag.
It's not something that puts her in danger because she even says she has done jumping before. So it's not something that you would expect somebody to get that angry about. Like she has the experience. She's done this many times. Why are you restricting her from doing this? It is, like you said, it's a red flag.
But whatever. They go out. They have a nice ride. She uses a bit more magic, and the same way she walks with her eyes closed, all of a sudden now she's riding with her eyes closed and like using magic inadvertently to like make Rakasa faster. So they have a nice little time outside, and Matthew sits her down, and then he tells her actually about her DNA.
He takes out the piece of paper and shows her that she has the predisposition for basically every witch power that exists that they know of.
Yeah, she's a super witch.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they sort of table that, go back to the house, and now for some reason, I don't know why, he starts to be more accommodating. So he asks her, please don't go riding by yourself, because he thinks it's dangerous. And she notices him like asking and saying, oh, well, this is a man that's used to being obeyed. But look, here he is. He's asking me. He's not just telling me. He's asking politely. So look at how he's changing for me. And it's like, bitch, 5 minutes ago, he told you weren't allowed to jump over a fence.
Yeah.
Like, he has not changed that much. Anyway, she goes for another freaking nap.
Yeah.
And then he sets her up in his little library. So when she wakes up, he's got that book he bribed her with ready for her to look at. But she just starts moseying around his library and finds a book about him. reads
Yeah.
that instead.
And you're like, are you ever going to finish this lecture for the conference that you're so worried about? It's in less than a month, ma'am. You should probably focus.
Yeah. It's like her work was super important, and now all of a sudden she's got a man. It's not important no more.
But I guess procrastination is a large part of trying to get papers done and talks ready. So I can understand that, but still, don't say you're not procrastinating.
They go down to dinner with Ysabeau. I found it a really odd dinner. So, like, they have dinner. After dinner, they dance in the middle of the living room.
Not
There's
something
like,
that happens at my parents' house after
no,
supper.
mine neither. No,
No.
we don't have dance parties or anything. And so first, Matthew and Ysabeau dance, and they do like a actual fancy, like a choreographed sort of ballroom dance. Then he decides he asks Diana to dance, and they dance, and they end up floating. She ends up levitating them because she's so happy, and her eyes were closed. So obviously she doesn't know she's floating until he says, "Open your eyes." And she opens them, and oh my gosh, we're floating.
So then Isabeau is talking to her, and she's like, Isabeau's saying that Diana can't turn away from her magic, and she needs to start learning more and doing more with her magic because she's obviously very powerful. And then Matthew gets mad at his mother for saying this, even though a few chapters ago he said the exact same thing to her. And Diana does stand up for herself and does tell them all to back off and that it's her choice, basically, and that she knows that she does need to start using magic more. But still, I found it very hypocritical of Matthew to get mad at his mother for the exact same shit that he said.
But, after that they finished and they went up to bed. They went up to his room. They did not sleep in the same room together. Let's make that clear. She got the bed to herself. He slept down in his study or something. But this time they finally kiss.
Yay!
So we finally have our first kiss between the two of them a whole week later. But she sort of wants to take it further. He does not, for reasons unknown as of yet. But she then compensates by asking him to sing her a song so she can go to sleep. Like she is a freaking child and needs a lullaby to go to sleep. The next day, we have a little bit of drama.
Yeah.
So they're just living their lives. And all of a sudden, we have a visitor at the castle. And his name is Domenico. So he is sort of a menacing character. They sort of see him like hanging at the gate. They go out and say like, "Hey, what are you doing here, Domenico?" And so he's sort of a menacing character. So I understand that he's meant to be the antagonist. He's meant to be a bad guy, but I just love him. In the TV show, especially, I love him. He's more like sort of neutral in the TV show, I find. He's not like super bad. Also, the actor that plays him is Greg Chillin. I just find him real dreamy.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm totally Team Domenico.
I do. I like the character. He's very gray, I would say.
Yes, gray is a great word. So Domenico and Matthew have a little bit of banter. So they seem to know each other quite well. They've done a lot of traveling together. It comes out that he works for the congregation. Okay, so we already discussed that the congregation is the society to help creatures stay hidden from humans. Matthew sort of insinuated in an earlier conversation with Marcus that he didn't think the congregation would enforce that rule of different creature relationships because it was such an old rule. Nobody ever broke it. He didn't think it would be that big a deal. Domenico sort of dissuades him of that notion and is like, we know what you're doing here, bud. We're not here for it. So he actually said, if that rule, they call it the covenant, if the covenant is broken, we will take action. So it's sort of a threat. He's there to deliver the message that, if anything happens between Matthew and Diana relationship wise, then the congregation will move forward with action. We don't know what action. They'll just move forward with action. Okay.
Repercussions of some sort.
Yeah. And Diana is very shocked when she hears this rule because Matthew
hasn't told her anything because he's a moron who's protecting her from everything.
She's shocked. And so she obviously comes back at Domenico and is sort of like, what business is it of the congregations what I do? Even though Domenico is like polite to her, she still says that everything he says feels like a threat.
It kind of makes you wonder if that's because Domenico wants it to sound like that, or if she's just being protective because he's so aggressive towards Matthew, if she's kind of feeling a protective instinct and seeing him as a threat instead of him trying to threaten her.
She tries to stand up for herself, and Matthew then growls at her and told her to go back to the house. Who the hell do you think you are, dude?
This is a conversation for men.
God. They do end up going inside and leave Matthew and Domenico to chat outside. Ysabeau takes Diana up to like the top of a tower and they raise a really interesting flag.
Yeah, Matthew had said that the citizens of the town know that they are vampires, or they did at one point, and they know that if this flag is up, then that means that there's danger, so they should close up early, get home, and not be out and about.
So while they're up in that tower, Ysabeau, I think, gives Diana a little bit more information on the congregation. So we learn that the covenant, which is this big series rule, is bound to all witches, vampires, and demons. Nobody is allowed to abstain. And the congregation is made up of 9 creatures, 3 from each species. And Peter Knox is one of the witches. So he's one of the 3 witches on the congregation. Ysabeau thinks that Diana is really super brave for talking back to Domenico and standing up for herself. That's so brave. He's a vampire. He could like kill you immediately. I think they're all being a bit condescending. Ysabeau also mentions that she thinks Diana should turn Matthew away. If she really loves him, she'll turn him away because if they break the covenant, they'll both be in danger. And she doesn't want Matthew to be in danger, does she? So it's one of those like, give him up to protect him sort of scenarios.
Which in this case makes a tiny bit more sense because like he can continue to live on forever and she just has a mortal lifespan. So I get why as his mother she's saying it, but it is definitely another trope that we're getting into of you gotta let him go, which obviously we know at this point isn't going to happen. If they're this in love after a few weeks, she's never going to give him up.
So Ysabeau then says like, they will kill him for breaking the covenant. Definitely him. She doesn't really say anything about them killing her.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just because she's like doesn't care about Diana, so she just doesn't bring it up. I don't know. Seems a bit odd.
Diana's obviously furious that he kept this rule from her, like this whole big thing. Like they've been sort of dancing around a relationship for a week, and he didn't even think to tell her that technically they're not allowed. However, he doesn't even come back inside for them to discuss it. As soon as Domenico leaves, Matthew goes off on his horse and has a temper tantrum all freaking day. He's gone all day. And he doesn't come back until like evening.
Yeah.
And then he just flat up says to Diana, she's like, well, what are we going to do about the covenant? And he says, it's fine. We're not breaking the covenant.
He's like, oh, we're not going to do that. And I'm going to take you back to college now. So this was a whole big diversion to France for no reason, but it's okay because I got a private jet. So let's just go back.
It bothers me because he doesn't even talk to her about it. It's just, I've made this decision. We're definitely not breaking the covenant.
Mhm.
Don't even think about it. And then on top of that, the whole reason he brought her to France was A, because she was getting threatened by Peter Knox, a member of the congregation, and B, they sent her like crazy pictures of her poor dead parents. So like he was like, "Oh, it's not safe for you here. Let's go." Is it too dangerous to be in Oxford because there's still the whole manuscript thing going on? Or can she not be in Septor because of the whole covenant thing going on? It's like she's not safe anywhere. But he's still like, "We're going to go back to Oxford." He's not making smart decisions.
No. And it's obviously because he's mad. And it goes back to Marcus said earlier that all of his dumb decisions were made when he was mad. And you can tell that when he's mad, he just doesn't think. He says dumb shit, obviously.
She tells him that she loves him. And he says, "Oh, no, you can't love me. We've only known each other for 3 weeks." It doesn't seem like it's been 3 weeks, but whatever. And in all fairness, truth, it feels like an Elsa moment. You can't marry a man you just met, right? Like, she's like, "Oh, I love you." But no, you've only just known him. You can't marry him. You can't be with him. You can't say you love him yet.
Yes, it's a bit wild. So yeah, she basically decides in her head that she loves him enough that it's okay if she can't see her family anymore and if she hurts her family, which seems a bit much at best. It's absolutely crazy that her aunts who have raised her since she was 7, she's now just going to throw them away for a man that she's known for 3 weeks.
It's very unbelievable. Like, I can imagine, yes, being in love is a thing, 100%, but I would never, and I would think that I am happily in love, but if somebody said, "Hey, your entire family will be in danger if you pursue this relationship," I would definitely think twice about it. Maybe
Yeah.
even 3 times.
Yeah. And
Right?
I'd probably try to find something other than just choosing one of them for sure. I'd try to find a different way around it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't just be like, well, I love him. That's it. Bye, fam.
Yeah. Yeah. However, the conversation now gets put on hold because Matthew gets some information that his lab has been broken into back in Oxford. So now all of a sudden, he has to go back to Oxford. And Diana originally is like, "Okay, well, I guess let's go." And he says, "No, you're staying here." So literally 5 minutes ago, he said, "We need to go back to Oxford. We can't stay here because of the covenant." And now, "You cannot come with me. It is too dangerous in Oxford." He needs to make up his freaking mind.
Yeah, he's all over the place.
Yeah. So he does leave her. He leaves her in France, protected.
Of course.
He leaves her and she gets very upset.
Yes.
So upset that she creates witch water. So earlier in this section, she made witch wind because she was upset in her dorm room. Now she's made witch water. So essentially, water is pouring out of every facial hole that she has.
Yeah.
So it's coming out of her eyes, it's coming out of her mouth, it's coming out of her nostrils, it's coming out of her fingertips, and her hair turns into water. Like, everything is water. And she's just like inconsolable. She's so unhappy. She wants to let the water take her. She wants to become water. And Ysabeau is standing there watching the witch water happen along with their housekeeper, Mart. And Ysabeau starts singing, which is what calms Diana down and has her come back to being solid and not water anymore.
Water. I don't really understand witch water. You'd think that her magic wouldn't be something that could kill her, or she'd have some protection from it in some sort. It just doesn't really make sense to me that her own magic almost just killed her.
But I agree with you in that I do think it tried to kill her, but I think it was more so, I think it was her consciousness, like just wanting to become the water because it was calming, right? It was like she was like floating on the water almost. So like she just wanted to let it take her away. I don't think it was a breathing issue. Like, I think she could still breathe, or she didn't feel the need to breathe. I don't think it was choking her. TV show Witchwater was completely different.
Yes.
It was just rain.
Which kind of makes more sense to me. I just always picture that kind of stuff as an external thing as opposed to happening to your body, like your hair turning into water. I would more assume it was external. But
here we
both
are.
Interesting takes.
Yes. So they get her solid again. But I guess after being exposed to all this water, they need to like take care of her, warm her up, get her dressed. They put her in a super hot bath and like keep changing the water out, and because she's like cold down to the bone. They dress her in the warm PJs and socks and get her all toasty in front of a fire with like a million blankets.
Yeah, so at one point, Diana asks Isabeau about the visions that she used to have when she was a human and asks if she was a witch as a human. And Isabeau is really upset that Matthew told Diana about her visions and says that it's not his story to tell. And then she goes ahead and tells Diana about Matthew and how he was turned into a vampire, which seems kind of backhanded and it wouldn't really be her story. But, maybe it's kind of in a part payback to Matthew and also a story to scare Diana a bit or kind of make her realize her insignificance in his very long life.
Yeah, so I guess this was sort of Diana's bedtime story. So she gets lullabies, she gets bedtime stories. Essentially, she's treated like a toddler in this castle. Ysabeau says, okay, if you get in bed and you go to sleep, have your snack. Right? They make her a little snack.
It's true.
Yeah. They say, then I'll tell you how Matthew was made into a vampire. So they tell her. He was a stonemason in the village where Ysabeau was living with her husband at the time, Philippe. They lived in their fortress. They took care of the village. And when Matthew was 25, he married Blanca, who was a beautiful village girl. They kept having a ton of miscarriages. And then finally, they had one son, Lucas. One day, they both succumbed to a fever of the time. So this was, again, back in probably the 5th, maybe 6th century. Mm-hmm. So obviously, a fever is actually quite deadly during this time. So both Lucas and Blanca died. Matthew was obviously inconsolable. And eventually, after a few weeks of mourning, he fell off a wall. So there was an insinuation by Ysabeau that maybe he didn't fall, maybe he jumped, but she turned him because she was actually afraid that if he had tried to commit suicide, he would not be able to join Blanca and Lucas in the afterlife when eventually it comes for him. Because obviously, in Christian religions, or at least the Catholic religion, suicide does not allow you to go into heaven. So that's why she turns him into a vampire and made him a member of the family.
And there's a few points in the story that are very pointed to not necessarily hurt Diana, but just make her realize that she isn't the only person that's ever been in Matthew's life. She says, Isabeau says at some points that he falls in love with Blanca because of how delicate she is, and then pointedly looks at Diana and is like, unlike you, basically. And that Matthew loves fragile things. And also, just the whole point of bringing up Blanca and Lucas to her as people that are in his past that he probably should have told her about himself, but it has only been 3 weeks. I guess it does take a bit of time to get into the part of a relationship, but it is a story that is told to her so that she knows that she isn't the first person that he's ever loved, and that he has loved somebody so much that he possibly did jump off of a wall to kill himself. So it's kind of a backhanded story in a way.
Yeah, and she also does say to Diana, like, I guess there might have been a look of shock on her face when Isabeau reveals that he was married and had a child. And she says, did you think that you were the first, right? It's like she's intentionally seems like she's trying to hurt her and trying to, I guess, show that you don't really know him the way you think you do. And therefore you can't love him the way you think you love him because you don't know him.
Yeah. And then it all comes back to, are you really going to break this rule that has been in place for so long to keep all creatures protected for a man that you really know nothing about?
And that's the end
We're
of
done.
this section.
Well, that wraps it up for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in our episodes or have any book suggestions, you can email us at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com. And be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at coffeeandcoread. That's COFFEEANDCOREAD. Next week, we'll be reading through chapters 24 to 33 of A Discovery of Witches, so make sure to follow along. And if you're enjoying our little chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you find our content. Thanks for listening, everyone, and see you on the next page.